My son cashed in my trust to fund his mother's betrayal. It took me 54 years to learn that the people you love the most are the ones who can hold the sharpest knives, and that the deepest wounds are not those that bleed, but those that fester in silence, fed by memories of what you thought was real. My name is Robert. For 26 years, I was married to a woman named Helen. We built a life from the ground up in a quiet, tree-lined suburb of Chicago, a life I believe was built on a foundation of shared dreams and mutual respect. I worked as a senior project manager for a well-established construction firm, a job that was demanding but provided a good, stable living. Helen worked as a receptionist at a bustling dental practice, a job she always said she enjoyed for the simple, predictable social interactions. Our world, our entire universe, revolved around our son, Daniel. He was a bright kid, maybe a little spoiled, being an only child, but I believe with every fiber of my being that he had a good heart. He graduated from a state university with a degree in graphic design and was trying, with a passionate struggle of youth, to make his way in a competitive and often unforgiving field. The cracks in my idyllic life started to appear about 3 years before the end. So faint at first, I convinced myself I was imagining them. Helen became subtly distant, a slow retreat that was more felt than seen. She started a book club that seemed to involve more expensive wine and designer cheese than actual literature. She took up Pilates with a new, flashy friend from the club, a woman named Brenda, whose husband was some big-shot finance guy. Our conversations, once filled with easy banter and shared jokes, became purely transactional. Discussions about bills, groceries, the weather, the easy laughter that filled our home for decades just evaporated. She started making pointed comments that felt like tiny paper cuts. Brenda's husband just surprised her with a new Lexus for her birthday. Or, the group is talking about a 2-week trip to Tuscany in the fall. Wouldn't that be something? I just shrug and say we had a good life, a paid-off house, a secure future. I remind her of our camping trips in Wisconsin, the simple pleasure of a Friday night pizza and a movie that seemed to irritate her more than anything, as if my contentment was a personal affront to her ambitions. The physical intimacy between us vanished, not with a bang, but with a slow, steady decline into nothingness. She was always on her phone, her body angled away from me, her thumbs flying across the screen with a frantic energy she never displayed with me. If I came too close, the phone would snap shut with a definitive click. I felt like a ghost in my own home, a spectator to a life I was no longer part of. I asked her more than once, my voice thick with confusion I couldn't articulate, if there was someone else. She would sigh, a long, suffering sound that made me feel small and foolish, and tell me I was being insecure and paranoid, that she was just expanding her horizons, and I was trying to hold her back in a past she had outgrown. Daniel, my boy, changed too. It was a shift in allegiance I felt in my bones. He and his mother developed a secretive, cliquish closeness. They'd have hushed conversations in the kitchen that would stop the moment I walked in, leaving a silence that was louder than any noise. He became her chief defender in absentia. Mom's just going through a phase. Dad, you need to give her space to find herself. When I tried to talk to him about my fears, my growing loneliness, he dismissed them with the impatient certainty of youth. You're imagining things. She's just stressed from work. You're reading too much into it. Around this time, Daniel started talking incessantly about his big dream, opening his own small, independent design studio. He had a business plan, he had passion and talent, but he had no capital. Banks were hesitant. The risk for a young and proven entrepreneur was too high. He grew increasingly anxious and depressed about it, the light in his eyes dimming with each rejected loan application. Helen started subtly, then not so subtly, pushing me, Robert, you have that investment portfolio from your father. It's just sitting there, gathering digital dust. We should help our son chase his dream. What's family for if not to support each other? What's that money for if not for our family's future? That portfolio was my safety net, my psychological security blanket. It was built from a modest inheritance from my hard-working parents and decades of my own careful, additional investing alongside my regular 401k contributions. It was my what-if fund. What if I had a medical emergency? What if the market crashed and I lost my job? It represented not just money, but peace of mind, a buffer against the uncertainties of life, and the promise of comfortable retirement after a lifetime of work. But after months of seeing Daniel's despair, of hearing Helen's persistent, logical-sounding arguments, my resolve crumbled. The desire to be the hero for my son, to fix his problem, overrode a lifetime of caution. I told Daniel I would liquidate a significant portion of the portfolio to give him the seed money he needed to launch his studio. The amount was $150,000, a life-changing, staggering amount. He was ecstatic. He hugged me, real tears in his eyes, and told me I was his hero, the best father a son could ask for. Helen smiled, a genuine-looking smile I hadn't seen in years, and patted my hand. "You're a good man, Robert. This is the right thing to do." We found a small, perfect retail space in a trendy, up-and-coming neighborhood. I became his unpaid laborer, helping with the renovations, swinging a hammer after my own long work hours, painting walls until midnight, assembling IKEA furniture until my back ached. For a few brief golden months, I felt like a father again, building a tangible future with my son. The studio opened to a promising start with a few local clients. I was so proud, so filled with a sense of purpose. I had invested in my son's future. I thought we were partners. The collapse happened on a rainy, grim Thursday in October. The sky was the color of bruised slate. I came home, tired but satisfied from a completed project, to find Helen sitting in the living room, not on our familiar, comfortable sofa, but on a straight-back chair from the dining set. A single, expensive-looking suitcase stood by the door like a sentinel. Her expression was cold, resolved, utterly foreign. She didn't mince words. She told me she was leaving. She said she felt suffocated by our life, by my predictability, my lack of ambition. She said she needed sparkle and spontaneity, things I could apparently never provide. Then she delivered the second blow with a chilling calmness. She told me about David, Brenda's husband's business partner. He was dynamic, exciting, and visionary. He understood her need for a life less ordinary, a life of culture and fine dining and travel. He saw the real her that I had apparently stifled for decades. I was numb. 26 years of shared history, of inside jokes and weathered storms, reduced to a list of my inadequacies. I asked how long it had been going on. "Almost a year," she said, without a hint of shame or remorse. She was moving into his penthouse apartment downtown with its panoramic city views. She didn't want anything from me, not the house, not any alimony. David provided everything she would ever need. Then, through the fog of my shock, I thought of our son. My voice was a broken thing as I asked about Daniel. How would we tell him? How would we manage this as a family for his sake? Helen looked at me with something close to pity, which was somehow worse than her anger. "Daniel knows, Robert. He's known for months." The floor fell away from under me. The room tilted. Months. I managed to choke out. She explained, as if to a slow child, that Daniel had accidentally seen flirtatious text messages and intimate photos between her and David on her iPad about 6 months prior. He'd been angry and confrontational at first, but Helen, my wife, the boy's mother, had calmly and systematically convinced him that she was profoundly unhappy, that I was holding her back, and that David offered her a chance at the real happiness she deserved. She told him that he, as her son, should support her pursuit of it. 6 months. I did the math, the numbers burning in my brain. 6 months meant that when Daniel was accepting my checks, when we were painting the walls of the studio a cheerful, optimistic yellow, when he was slapping me on the back and calling me his hero and his partner, he knew. He knew his mother was cheating. He knew she was planning to leave me. He took $150,000 of my security, my future, my what-if fund, while fully aware that my present, my what-is, was about to be obliterated. The hugs, the tears of gratitude, the shared sweat, it was all performance. I felt a physical, searing pain in my chest. My breath hitched. I asked to confirm it, my voice a dry whisper. Did he know when I gave him the money for the studio? When I liquidated my father's legacy for him? Yes, she said, a flicker of impatience in her eyes. He thought it would be better to wait until after the studio was successfully launched. He didn't want to upset you and ruin his one big chance. The timing was just unfortunate. Unfortunate. The word echoed in the hollowed-out space where my heart used to be. I didn't say another word. I couldn't. I just pointed a trembling finger toward the door. She stood, smoothed her expensive skirt, picked up her suitcase, and walked out without a backward glance, getting into a sleek black car that was idling at the curb, its engine purring like a contented cat. I stood there in the open doorway, watching the taillights disappear into the gray, rainy dusk, feeling the cold air seep into my soul. I stumbled to the phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely press the buttons. I tried call Daniel. It went straight to voicemail. His cheerful, recorded voice felt like a mockery. I called again and again. Nothing. A frantic, desperate energy took over. I drove to a studio, the studio I had helped create. The lights were on inside, casting a warm, inviting glow that now seemed sinister. I knocked, then pounded on the glass door with the flat of my hand. I saw a shadow move inside, a silhouette I would recognize anywhere, but the door never opened. The lock remained engaged. He was in there, my son, the boy I had read bedtime stories to, taught to ride a bike, the young man I had just given my entire financial security to, was hiding from me. The son I had built a future for was hiding from a father whose future he had helped dismantle. The following weeks were a dark, featureless blur. The silence in the house was a physical presence, heavy and suffocating. I told my sister, my only close relative, what had happened, the full, ugly story, including the gut-wrenching details of the money. She was speechless with fury on my behalf, a fury I was too broken to feel. I spoke to a lawyer, a grim-faced, pragmatic man who listened to my story with a detached professionalism and then shook his head. The money was a gift, he explained. There was no paper trail, no promissory note, no email explicitly suggesting it was a loan. Trying to prove fraudulent intent or undue influence would be a costly, protracted, and almost certainly futile battle. You'd be spending another $50,000 to $75,000 in legal fees to maybe, possibly, get a fraction of it back. If you're lucky, he said, not unkindly. I'm sorry, Robert. Sometimes the legal system can't fix a broken heart. I sank into a deep, paralyzing depression. The twin betrayals from my wife and my son felt like a terminal diagnosis. They weren't just actions. They were a fundamental rewriting of my entire past, turning every happy memory into a potential lie. I saw a therapist, a patient woman, who gave me the vocabulary for my pain. She helped me understand that my grief was valid, that this was profound trauma, a form of emotional theft that went far beyond the money. I stopped trying to contact Daniel. What was left to say? His silence, his choice to hide behind that locked door, was his final, devastating answer. Helen's divorce proceedings were swift and brutally clean. She wanted nothing from our former life, and I wanted nothing from her. As soon as it was finalized, I sold the family home. The memories in every room, now exposed as fraudulent, were too painful to bear. The house where I had raised my family felt like a museum of a life that never truly existed. I used the proceeds to buy a compact, modern, two-bedroom condo closer to the lake. It was a fresh start, a sterile and anonymous one, but it was mine and mine alone. No ghosts lurked in its corners. Over the next 3 years, I rebuilt my life, piece by fragile piece. It was a slow, deliberate process. I poured myself into work, taking on more complex, challenging projects that demanded my full attention. I lived frugally, and with a discipline born of necessity, I slowly, painstakingly rebuilt my savings, though I knew in my heart I would never fully recover that stolen nest egg, that security my parents had worked so hard to provide. I learned, force-fed by circumstance, to be content with my own company. I took long walks by the lake, read books, and learned to cook for one. The sharp, stabbing pain of betrayal eventually dulled into a constant, low-grade ache, a scar that would always be there. I heard through the withered grapevine of mutual acquaintances that Helen was living a life of breathtaking luxury with David, traveling the world, attending glamorous parties, a permanent, dazzling smile plastered on her face. I assumed Daniel was thriving with his studio, perhaps even benefiting from his mother's new wealthy connections, his success a monument to my naivety. I made a conscious, daily effort to lock them out of my mind and my heart. They were part of a past I was determined to survive. Then, one unremarkable Tuesday evening, the doorbell of my condo rang, shattering the peaceful quiet I had cultivated. I wasn't expecting anyone. A prickle of unease ran down my spine. I looked through the peephole and felt my knees go weak. The breath caught in my throat. It was Helen and Daniel. They looked diminished, faded, like copies of their former selves. Helen's expensive blonde highlights had grown out, revealing inches of drab, mousy brown roots, and she wore a cheap-looking, thin jacket unsuitable for the chilly evening. Daniel looked tired, anxious, and much older than his years, the youthful enthusiasm I remembered completely erased. A part of me, the wounded, frightened animal, screamed to ignore them, to retreat into the safety of my solitude. But a colder, harder part, the part that had been forged in the fire of their betrayal and tempered in the long, lonely years that followed, was morbidly curious. Why now, after 3 years of absolute silence, what could possibly bring them to my doorstep? I took a deep, steadying breath and opened the door. The story tumbled out of them in a rushed, panicked, uncoordinated duet. David's financial empire, it turned out, was a spectacular house of cards, built on debt, risky investments, and, it was hinted, some potentially fraudulent dealings. It had all collapsed, utterly and publicly. He was deeply in debt, under investigation by federal authorities, his assets frozen. He'd lost the penthouse, the fancy cars, everything. In a fit of rage and blame, he had thrown Helen out with nothing but her luggage and a few pieces of jewelry he deemed worthless. She had been staying with Daniel at his studio's small back office for the past 3 weeks, but it was a disaster. Daniel's business, it turned out, was also failing. The initial success hadn't lasted. Bigger, more established firms had undercut him. Clients were scarce, and the rent, utilities, and business loan payments for the studio were crushing him. He was on the verge of personal bankruptcy and losing the studio entirely. They had come to me, their faces etched with desperate hope that turned my stomach, for a full-scale rescue mission. Helen, with tears welling in her expertly made-up eyes, a habit that apparently died hard, asked if she could stay in my spare room. Just for a little while, Robert, just until I can get back on my feet and find a job. Daniel, avoiding my gaze, asked if I could loan him money, a substantial amount, to cover his back rent, his overdue bills, and keep his business afloat for another 6 months. He ended his plea with the words that cut deeper than all others. "You're my dad. You have to help us. Family doesn't abandon family." The audacity was staggering, breathtaking in its scale. After 3 years of silence, after the lies, the calculated deception, and the theft of my security and my peace, they stood on my doorstep and asked me to open my home and my wallet as if it were the most natural, expected thing in the world. They saw me not as a person they had grievously wronged, but as a utility, a safety net they had disconnected in a moment of perceived better options and now needed to desperately reconnect. I didn't yell. I didn't slam the door in their faces, though every instinct told me to. I looked at them, at their pleading, desperate faces, and felt a great, yawning chasm of nothingness. I told them, my voice surprisingly calm and steady, that I needed time to think and that I would call them tomorrow. They left, their shoulders slumping with a palpable relief, looking hopeful, as if they had just placed an order at a drive-thru they were sure would be filled. The next 24 hours were not spent in agonizing indecision. They were spent in cold, clear-eyed resolution. The grief and the rage had long since burned away, leaving behind a core of hardened certainty. The next day, I called Daniel and asked him to meet me at a neutral, public location, a quiet park bench by the lake, the vast, gray, indifferent water a fitting backdrop. I arrived first, watching the waves crash against the shore with a relentless, impersonal force. They approached tentatively, like scolded children, and sat down, their bodies tense with expectation. I didn't let them speak. I didn't offer them the courtesy of restating their case. I looked first at Helen, my gaze flat and unwavering. "You made a choice," I began, my voice cut into the cold air. "You chose to leave our 26-year marriage for what you believed was a better, richer, more exciting life. You made that choice freely and without consultation. The inescapable consequence of that choice is that when that new, shiny life fell apart, as unstable things often do, you had no claim on me. Your current homelessness, your desperation, is a problem of your own making. It is not my mess to clean up." I then turned to Daniel. My voice was still steady, but inside, my heart was a drumbeat of old, remembered pain. "And you," I said, locking eyes with him. For a moment, I saw the little boy he used to be, and it was a physical ache. "I gave you $150,000, my entire safety net. The money my parents worked their entire, humble lives to leave for me, combined with decades of my own sacrifice. You took that money, every single dollar of it, knowing that your mother was actively engaged in an affair and was planning to abandon me. You lied to my face. You looked me in the eye and you accepted my life's work, and you let me invest my sweat and my soul into your studio, all while knowing the foundation of my life was rotten and about to collapse. You didn't just keep a secret, Daniel. You were an active, willing participant in a scheme to secure your own future by deliberately betraying mine. You were complicit in the destruction of my world." I let the words hang in the cold air between us, stark and undeniable. They both looked stunned, as if the simple, direct concept of consequences was a foreign language they had never bothered to learn. "My decision is final," I said, my tone leaving no room for negotiation. "I will not be giving you any money. Not for your rent, Helen, and not for your failing business. Daniel, you will not be moving into my home. That chapter of my life is closed. Permanently. The ink is dry. The book is on the shelf." Helen began to sob, a loud, performative wail meant to elicit sympathy. "How can you be so cruel? So heartless? I have nothing. I'm your wife." "You were my wife," I corrected her coldly. "You terminated that contract when you walked out to get into David's car. You have the life you chose. You gambled on a richer man, and you lost. Daniel's face was ashen, his hands clenched into fists on his knees. "You're really going to do this?" he whispered, his voice thick with a mixture of disbelief and anger. "You're really going to stand by and watch us fail? Watch me lose everything." "You didn't hesitate to help me fail," I replied, and in that moment, I felt the last fragile thread connecting us snap. "You received your inheritance from me early, and under the most false and hurtful pretenses imaginable. Consider that money, the $150,000, the studio it built, the dream it funded, the final gift from your father. There will be no more. Do not contact me again for money, for shelter, or for sympathy. You exhausted my entire supply 3 years ago." I stood up. My legs felt steady. Helen was still crying, but the sound was distant, irrelevant. Daniel just stared at the ground, utterly defeated. I didn't feel triumphant or victorious. I felt a profound, bone-deep sadness for the family that had died long ago, for the relationships that were now just tombstones in the cemetery of my past. But I also felt a clear, clean, and powerful sense of resolution. The scales, while not balanced, were at least no longer being loaded against me. I turned and walked away from them, along the deserted lakefront path, the cold wind off the water whipping at my coat. It felt like a baptism, a cleansing. The Bank of Robert, looted by its most trusted signatories, was closed forever. And for the first time in 3 long years, the silence that surrounded me felt not like loneliness, but like peace.